Resident Evil 0 is a game that I have very mixed feelings about. On the one hand, it's more of a remake. Same controls, same graphics, same sort of combat, and the two-partner thing has never really bothered me. On the other, it has some really irritating design choices, way more so than any other Resident Evil that I have ever played. The game works, nothing is broken, and it is a fun time. But certain things added into this game make me scratch my head in some places, and in others make me want to cause untold damage to my dear controller. That's what we're going to be talking about actually. What Resident Evil 0 does poorly. What makes me hate it. Well, sometimes. Alright, so first I'll answer a very important question. Is the game bad? No. The game is fine. A lot of reviews I see online are of people absolutely tearing this game apart, and whilst I agree, again, that some of its parts are bad, overall it's a solid product that absolutely deserves a play. And I must also compliment the HD remaster that the game got. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Compared to the remaster of the remake, this looks leagues better than that. There are reasons for that though. Basically, for the remake, they didn't have the original background files, so they had to upscale them in any way they could. This was way before AI upscaling was really a mainstream thing, and unfortunately, they kinda did it a little bit, well, bad. With Resident Evil 0, they had backup copies of the backgrounds at surprisingly high resolution, so it was really easy to re-implement them. That's why the game just looks so good. Alright, enough with the positives. You aren't here for that, neither am I. So what irritates me? Well, I'll tell you, but first you will need to keep in mind that this is a list coming from someone who's played this game countless times. Some complaints that I originally had, such as enemy count and puzzles, are no longer a factor as I am way more experienced with the game, and obviously things that you might not like won't be the same as mine, and vice versa. So, without further ado, let's go. I'm starting off with more of a nitpick than anything truly bad. As we know, Rebecca in Resident Evil 1 is shown to be a little bit incompetent. Sure, she's helpful, healing Chris when needed and playing the piano, but she is also shown to be completely unable to take down a single hunter. Rebecca in Resident Evil 0, however, is shown to be fairly proficient with firearms via gameplay. She can use every weapon and is just as accurate as Billy is. In fact, she fires a hunting rifle faster than Billy does, so if anything, she is better in some aspects. So why, in RE1, is she shown to be somewhat of a damsel in distress? She had an entire previous night fighting zombies, hunters, leechmen, even tyrants, and yet is taken off guard by a single hunter, making Chris have to save her. Now, the elephant in the room. I know that Resident Evil 1 was made first. We all know that. So anything Rebecca does in 0 wasn't thought of yet. And Shinji Mikami has said prior that he regrets making Rebecca a helpless character. So it does make sense that she's at least competent in 0 to offset her original portrayal. I guess you could chalk it up to her being exhausted by Zero's events. So by the time Chris finds her, she's not prepared for anything more. It's still a bit of a leap though, in my opinion. Also, you'd think that after all the research that the main characters came across about Umbrella and Marcus, that Rebecca would inform Chris that Umbrella was behind everything. Centering Zero's plot around Dr. Marcus and his betrayal by Umbrella and having the characters visit the Umbrella training facility, among other areas, was honestly a massive mistake. Rebecca has far too much knowledge of the events that transpired, which is in contrast to her oblivious nature in Resident Evil 1. In my opinion, RE0 could have kept these locations, but made the plot purely based on Rebecca and Billy surviving the locations and maybe getting hints to what is going on, rather than bioweapons outright telling them Umbrella is the cause. I guess this can be seen as nitpicky too, but honestly these examples are way more egregious. So near the end half of Resident Evil 0, Rebecca uses a cable car to travel to a new location. What location is this? Why, Rebecca finds herself at the marshalling yard that was present in RE2, and in extension, the outside of the lab. I don't think I really need to explain just how law-breaking this actually is. Capcom tried to save face by making your character unable to investigate these returning areas, but any police officer in this situation that's worth a damn will no doubt search these areas. Obviously, this would have led to Rebecca finding the G-Virus in the lab, so yeah, we can't exactly have that, as that would raise even more questions and shatter pre-existing law. So, these areas are blocked off. Whatever, it doesn't really matter all that much, right? Well, actually, the implementation of the marshalling yard matters a lot for a couple of reasons. First, let's talk about Enrico. Last time we saw him, he was in the forest with the other Bravo team members. Somehow, some way, by some miracle, he ends up at the Umbrella Laboratory, coming out of an elevator in time to run into Rebecca. First of all, Enrico coming out of this particular elevator would seem to suggest that he ended up at the train station at the bottom of the nest, or at the very least in the basement area. So that already irks me, as that means Enrico already knows way too much at this point in the timeline. Also, we never run into Enrico prior to this, or after for that fact. The only way we've seen people get here in any of the games is either through the Raccoon City sewers in Resident Evil 2, or this new cable car from the training facility that takes you away from the original location. There's no physical way that he managed to find himself at this lab at all. He's just somehow teleports his way there. Then, in another feat of inhuman capabilities, he ends up at the Spencer Mansion, where he's ultimately killed off by Wesker. There's no way anyone could have done that in one night. That's days of walking at least, unless he came from the training facility, which is extremely plausible unfortunately, because of one particular elevator. So what happens when you make an RE game where you can drop items? Well, naturally, players will inevitably find safe rooms to stash all of their most important equipment. That's all well and good, but then what happens when the game inevitably changes locations? Somewhere far away. What happens to all of those items? Well, they stay there. Which sucks, and with 12 collective item spaces, you can only bring so many items with you. I believe that due to this game's lack of item boxes, Capcom realized that they may have done a big whoopsie daisy and needed to have a way for players to quickly get back to the training facility. But rather than make logical sense, they decided to create the elevator. This magical wondrous device doesn't just go up and down, it also travels sideways and long ways and every other way you can think of. That's the only explanation I can give to you to explain how it takes you back to the training facility. Right back to the train crash, might I add. Very convenient, as it's only a couple of doors away from the main hall where most characters stash their valuables. And this elevator also unfortunately explains how Enrico could have made his way to the marshalling yard in the outskirts of the Arklay Mountains. But even then, that makes no sense either, as Rebecca and Billy were on the express for a while whilst it was moving, and even had to stop it as it was slowly gaining speed, eventually leading to their crash. This is a massive guess, by the way, but if they were on that train for even 15 minutes at the speed that they were going, that would be at least 25 kilometers away. Good luck walking that in the night, Enrico. Even if you follow the tracks all the way there, and somehow walked through the wreckage and the flames blocking the path, it would still just take too long. Plus, I'm pretty sure Enrico isn't capable of resisting burning to death. Not to mention that the factory that Billy and Rebecca end up at eventually takes them all the way back to the training facility by the massive elevator near the end. The self-destruct system for the building is triggered, which somehow also means that the factory that they end up at is also going to explode. If you were to put all the major locations on the map, the only things that make sense is the facility. The moment you reach the marshalling yard, time and space don't make sense. I'm losing my mind talking about this. I could talk about it for hours, so I'm gonna stop. Alright, so we've gotten past the more nitpicks and story-related stuff. Time for some gameplay things. As with every video game in known existence, this survival horror experience has bosses. The first 3 bosses are mutated animals, and then the final 4 are 2 Tyrant fights and 2 Leech Queen fights. I'll be talking about the first 3 bosses because they honestly suck. The first boss is against a massive scorpion that you fight on the train. This boss can block his face, with the outer shell deflecting bullets, so that means you have to back up as he is coming forward. And you can only back up on a train cart so much until you're up against the wall, so you have no place to maneuver. The thing is, you can use the knife to repel him with every swipe. So in other words, you have an annoying gunfight that will drain you of health and resources, or you can trivialize the fight entirely by stabbing him in the face, which turns it into a long and boring fight. The second boss is against a giant centipede that really just likes hugs. So much so, in fact, that he hugs Rebecca until she's dead. As Billy, you are tasked with making this thing keel over and die. Due to the whole hugging Rebecca thing, this boss is timed. How long? I really don't know. I don't think I've ever failed it. The time fights are still annoying, especially as this boss really just comes out of nowhere. There's no indication that the fight will occur in this area, although you can kind of say the same thing about most RE games to be fair. To top it all off, this thing just loves to run away from you. He runs, and he runs, and he scuttles, and he scuttles all over the arena, trying to keep his precious Rebecca safe. And all you can do is shoot, and shoot, and shoot, until it's dead. It will only ever harm you if you are directly in front of it. It's literally just a cat and mouse game, and honestly, it's just boring. The third boss is the worst boss in any RE game. Yeah, you know what? I said it. The worst. It's the giant bat creature that you fight in the church. He has two methods of attacking you. Slicing you with his long talons or picking you up and dropping you like a bad date. First attack doesn't really hurt your health all that much. The second one hurts just as much as you think falling to the ground would do. Doesn't sound so bad so far, except for the fact that it's always in the air. Always moving, so getting any precise shots with anything other than the shotgun is an exercise in frustration. The early fight consists of 60% dodging, 20% shooting, and the other 20% hating the game. But it gets worse. Oh boy, does it get worse. When this abomination takes enough damage, it decides to bring about 20-ish smaller bats into the fray. And this is when the fight breaks. The game has auto-aim that prioritizes the enemy closest to you, which is usually fine. However, these little bats count as enemies, and there's 20-ish of them. You see the problem? I'll give you a couple seconds. Yeah, the auto-aim doesn't aim at the boss. It aims for the babies, so you can't shoot the boss effectively. And so while you're fighting with this mechanic, the bats will hit you and they will stun you. So you stop aiming, you get flinched and lose whatever target that you had before. And then you aim again, this time aiming at another bat, and before you can fire, the boss has decided to pick you up and throw you to the ground again. Rinse and repeat the entire fight. So why not just turn the auto-aim off? Well, you can't. It's a mechanic that's hard-coded into the game, into its very DNA. Also, have you ever tried to manually aim at a fast-moving target in this game? Have fun with that. Look, I'll be coming back to this boss a little bit later on, as one of my complaints ties directly into this boss. Anyway, I've been ranting enough about it, and I think you get the point. Funny thing is, the rest of the boss fights are fine. I don't really have a problem with any of them. However, there's a caveat to that, which, again, I'll have to come back later to expand upon. Alright, so I'm gonna get the most notorious enemy out of the way first. The Leechmen. Originally, I outright hated these things. I thought they were too resilient, did too much damage, had too much range, and punished you for not killing them correctly. And whilst all those things are still true, I've learned how to properly deal with them now, and now they are just annoying rather than outright bad. They are definitely a beginner's trap type of enemy, one where for the first couple of playthroughs you will curse their inclusion and hate them. But once you figure them out, they sort of become a nuisance rather than a threat, as there's only ever one in any given room, and baiting out their grab attack isn't that hard. Plus, they only ever whip with the side of their body, which admittedly still has absurd range, but it isn't all that hard to avoid. And when they blow up and explode, when you don't kill them with flame rounds, you can leave the room as they're exploding, and when you come back, they're gone. Ultimately, these Leechmen aren't much of a threat, even on the hardest difficulties. I can't say the same for the Eliminators. These monstrosities are the definition of bullshit. They are small, they are fast, and they are incredibly deadly. They act like hunters in the original game. Once you hit a certain point, these Eliminators swarm certain rooms where zombies used to be. But the hunters are in this game, and they're fine. They are identical to their remake counterparts. Fair and balanced, tough, but enjoyable to kill. What's so bad about the Eliminators then? Well, Resident Evil 0, unlike nearly all other classic RE games, has very few invincibility frames for when you're damaged. These apes stagger you with each hit, which is usually fine. However, the recovery on their attacks is far faster than the recovery of your stagger. If it's a light stun, they'll already have hit you another time before you recover. If it's a heavy stun, they can hit you 3 to 4 times before you regain control. Keep in mind as well that they usually come in packs of 3 or 4, meaning that your health is just going to waste away while you stand there and take it. Their small stature doesn't help either, as you can easily miss them in certain rooms and be blindsided completely. This also means that with weapons with no spread, you must aim at the floor to shoot them, which is beyond annoying and can lead to unnecessary misses. Not to mention the fact that they are just incredibly bullet resistant. Lastly, they are just way too fast and bouncy. They jump around, bounce off walls, bounce off of you, and honestly, the tank controls just don't suit fighting them at all. What you are left with is an enemy that will stun lock you to death, attack in packs, are way too fast and small for their own good, and are incredibly small and hard to hit. You can't run away from them when you have both characters together, and going alone is just as risky, as Rebecca is far too weak to take any type of damage whatsoever. The only viable strategy with these things is bunkering down in a corner, and either using the shotgun or the grenade launcher, and even then, the former takes 4 to 5 shotgun shells to kill these things. They are just broken. Resident Evil 0 has inventory issues, we all know that. Due to 2 characters with 6 item slots each, Capcom decided to double the amount of key items in the game for your characters to grab. Honestly, it's not that bad. Sure, on your first playthrough, you'll constantly be annoyed with how many times you have to drop items and come back to pick them up later, but it's survival horror. Inventory management is part of the genre, it's just something that you get over eventually. But the Hookshot breaks that rule. This item is a sinister piece of machinery. You end up getting it on the train at the start of the game to rappel yourself onto the train car roof. It takes 2 item slots and sends only 1 character up at a time. That's fine, all's well that ends well. Once the train ends up crashing, any item that you dropped will be at the wreckage for yours to grab. Weapons, ammo, health, and the hookshot. Now, on a first playthrough, you have absolutely no idea that this item will be required later, so you leave it there. Hours go by, you're finding keys, opening doors, fighting bosses and enemies, all the while you've completely forgotten that this hookshot item even exists. You find the 3 slates and you end up at the church, halfway through the game. You encounter the bastard bat boss and you finally kill the thing. You're relieved, your resources empty, you make your way to the door, and then the camera angle changes. A hole in the roof. Oh, Capcom, what do you mean? What do you mean I need the hookshot? Where it is the thing? Ah, yes, the train wreck. Wow. Well, time to run back and grab it. You venture back, and now that you've used the observatory, you're placed out on the balcony with the 2 eliminators that just serve to get in your fucking way and be a pest. Alright, we're here. Hopefully you remembered that it uses 2 item slots and that you don't have anything too important with you if you need to drop anything. So then you run all the way back and you use the thing. Now, admittedly, you will need to use this thing 2 more times, so you don't have to wait a massive amount of time to use it again, but like, talk about being blindsided. This item is entirely irrelevant for almost half of the game, and then, when you've completely forgotten about it, it has the audacity to want to be used again. This one item leaves a massive sour taste in my mouth. I hate it with a passion because it's just so sneaky. It feels wrong to have to wait this long for an item to be used again. It would be like if in Resident Evil 1, you obtain the sword key and use it on all 3 doors in the mansion, but it still isn't discarded. You think nothing of it. No doors needed, you put it in the item box. You get to the underground caves, you grab the crank and you rotate the passageway so that you can cross over. You get to the end door and locked, a carving of a sword. It's like, oh, hey, that's really irritating. And what's that? Oh, the closest item box is back at the guardhouse. Oh, Capcom, you're so cool. You're so special. See, this also presents a problem later on as well. Once you use the hookshot for the final time near the cable car, you never need it again. But unbeknownst to you, because the game has already pulled this stunt before, on a first playthrough, you'll drag the item along with you, leaving other precious items behind in the vain hope that you might just need it again. But you don't. And Capcom knew that. Capcom knew what you were going to do. The item is pure evil. Alright, so everything that I've complained about so far has kind of been leading to this. You've probably been watching the video, listening to the gameplay related problems and going, it's not that bad. There are plenty of healing items and ammo, you're just a little bitch. And you're right, to an extent. You see, on easy and normal, most of the gameplay related annoyances that I've been talking about are more so minor ones than anything truly game breaking. There's plenty of ammo in the game, a decent amount of powerful weapons, many herbs, and Billy has more health than a Metal Gear. So a lot of the issues that this game has won't be apparent to you, because you can make plenty of mistakes in the earlier difficulties and still come out on top. That all changes with hard mode. Just like Remake, hard mode decreases player health, removes ammo and health items, and buffs enemy health slightly. These 3 factors right here are enough to cause the game to kind of implode on itself. It goes from being a somewhat annoying experience to a frustratingly unfair slog. The majority of the footage that you've been seeing in this video has been on hard mode, as I believe that this difficulty truly brings out the problem that this game has. Enemy stun locking you becomes a much larger issue when both Billy and Rebecca are weaker. Rebecca is so weak on this difficulty that seeing her in yellow caution will be the norm, as any attacks done to her on fine health will instantly take her out of that status. Billy is still stronger, however, instead of being able to take 3 or 4 attacks before yellow caution, he now only takes 2 to 3. This is actually really bad, as the way Billy's health works is that he just has a metric fuck ton of fine health. Once he drops below that status, his health becomes very similar to Rebecca. So Billy losing fine health numbers is a massive detriment to his character. A lot of the useful ammo is also just outright removed. Compared to Remake, where they remove ammo but also replace a lot of shotgun shells with handgun rounds, Zero just removes ammo entirely. With the amount of enemies in this game, a lot of them being really hard to avoid, you will most definitely feel this change, and you will struggle late game when you realize all that ammo that you wasted early on with the zombies and leechmen were needed for the last couple of bosses. Weapons that you ignore on normal mode, such as the Magnum and Molotov, now become much more valuable as you scrape every bit of ammo to survive. And even leaving 1 Magnum bullet or 1 Molotov or 1 shotgun shell can be the difference between life or death. Relating to this, a lot of extra herbs are also missing. The game basically gives you enough herbs for a game with one playable character, but not two, meaning that being at full health is very rare, and due to the decreased health of our main protagonists, you can go from being healthy, with maybe 1 or 2 healing items on each character, to barely alive with no healing. As remember, you have 2 characters, each with their own health pools, and each causing a game over if they die. These item changes wouldn't be too bad if the game had item boxes, but as stated previously, it does not. Items must be left on the ground, so when you eventually leave each of the 3 main areas, you must leave a lot of valuable weapons and healing behind so that you can grab the new key items ahead. Not to mention slogging around the hookshot. Even near the end of the game, when you actually use that magic elevator to go back to the training facility, you might not even want to, as the amount of backtracking required to get back to those safe item havens might just be too irritating. The thing is, you have to do it, especially if you left powerful items behind, but it just makes the game feel all the more punishing. The bosses become even more infuriating in this difficulty as well. The Bat, the one that I bitched and moaned about earlier, becomes the devil incarnate, as this boss is a master of wasting your resources due to actual game design flaws. Fighting this thing as Rebecca is always risky on the easier difficulties, but on hard, this boss with her is basically just a death wish, so you need to play as Billy. Anyway, the complaints that I have with the boss have already been detailed earlier, but just multiply them by about 7 billion. The last 2 bosses, Marcus and Queen Leech, also become incredibly annoying, mostly due to the minuscule health Rebecca has. Losing these fights all comes down to whether Rebecca is managed appropriately or not. Best way to do it is to actually play as her during these battles, just so you can effectively dodge the bosses enough and let Billy tank hits, as much as you can on this difficulty anyway. That's honestly just hard mode in a nutshell, a babysit simulator. Make sure Rebecca doesn't get hurt too much or you'll regret it later when you're out of supplies. I think you get it at this point. Hard mode is probably one of, if not the most brutal classic Resident Evil you can play. You'll beat this difficulty and think to yourself, yeah, nah, that wasn't worth it. I've beaten hard mode 4 times now over the course of a couple of years, and only during this latest playthrough can I confidently say that I got through it without it taking years off of my life. And from a hardcore RE fan, damn, that must be bad, you know? This video was a long time coming. I've had these issues with this game for a long time, and I've always wanted to find a way to express my complaints in a way that is both constructive and entertaining. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 0 is still decent. I know I've taken a very long time to bash it and moan about it, but it's still classic Resident Evil. It's just not a strong entry, and it feels somewhat limited by the engine that it was using at the time. It's definitely hard to balance a survival horror game around 2 characters with different inventories and different weapons without making the game feel either too easy or too hard. Capcom tried this system again with Revelations 2, where you are constantly swapping between 2 characters that have different abilities to find items to solve puzzles, and honestly, while that game also has issues of its own, it is a far less frustrating experience on higher difficulties. Resident Evil 0 has its flaws, but it's worth playing if you're a fan of classic Resident Evil. I just have my issues with it, as I've detailed, and also just don't play it on hard mode. That's a surefire way of making you hate the game with a passion. All that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.